On October 20th, 1924, a massive explosion occurred inside the forward turret of the light cruiser USS Trenton. Heroics in the aftermath of the explosion resulted in awarding 2 Medals of Honor and a Navy Cross. But the explosion shocked the public, not just because it was a deadly explosion that occurred in peacetime, but because it was the second such explosion to have occurred on a U.S. Navy ship that year. In fact, there are risks inherent with using those big guns on Navy ships. Explosions from naval cannon have been around as long as gunpowder, and certainly as long as the U.S. Navy. 2 of the 18-pounders aboard John Paul Jones's ship Bonhomme Richard exploded early in the Battle of Flamborough Head, a battle in which Jones is reported to have shouted, "I have not yet begun to fight." Those lost cannon compelled Jones to lock the 2 ships together and board HMS Serapis, which he then captured, while Bonhomme Richard sank. After the battle, the British referred to Jones as a pirate, because, of course, don't all good stories involve pirates. A cannon explosion destroyed the Robert Fulton-designed Demologos, the world's first steam-propelled warship, in 1829, and an exploding cannon aboard USS Princeton in 1844 might have dramatically altered the course of U.S. history. Both of those are subjects of other episodes of the History Guy. But the advent of modern steel warships with massive gun turrets offered new risks, as guns were larger and explosions could be more deadly inside the enclosed armored turret. The destructiveness of such an explosion was experienced aboard the pre-dreadnought battleship USS Massachusetts in 1903. While the U.S. was still fighting in the Philippines at the time, the explosion in the ship's secondary 8-inch gun battery came during target practice off the Puerto Rican island of Culebra. The Indiana-class battleship's main guns were a 13-inch cannon and a forward turret, but the secondary battery consisted of 4 twin wing turrets mounting formidable 8-inch guns, placed around the superstructure. 9 sailors and 1 officer manned each of the turrets, protected by 6 inches of armor. These guns operated by a method that would underlie many dangerous accidents. The Boston Globe reported that the 8-inch guns are just above the rapid-fire gun limit, so their charges are not contained in fixed metallic cases, and the powder is put up in canvas bags. This obviously could be a risk to have exposed canvas bags full of gunpowder out where, things might get hot. Although the Globe explains the regulations require that the powder bag shall be conveyed from the magazine to the breech of the gun in a can-like metal receptacle, intended to guard against accidents. On January 16, 1903, Massachusetts was engaging in target practice when, shortly before noon, the Globe writes, there was an accidental discharge of a percussion primer while the breech of the gun was open. This detonation of a charge of 105 pounds of smokeless powder inside the enclosed turret killed 4 members of the gun crew outright and injured the other 5, although the officer in charge of the gun, Ensign Ward K. Wortman, escaped injury. All 5 of the injured, whom the Globe described as burned, mutilated, and nearly dead, would eventually succumb to their injuries. The Globe writes, the last words of all men taken from the turret in a dying condition were practically the same. I did my duty. Love to home. But the risk in such an explosion is always greater than the initial blast, as fire on board a warship laden with explosives can cause a chain reaction that can cripple or sink a ship. The Globe writes that the magnificent discipline was immediately shown by the officers and crew of the battleship, with sailors risking themselves to flood the turret with a hose and move powder stored below and in adjacent turrets to prevent additional explosions. A review board initially found that Ensign Wortman committed a grave error in directing the opening of the breech to return electric firing, but the mistake was not necessarily fatal, and the procedure was not in violation of any drill regulations. The board recommended no action against the ensign, but that instructions are indefinite and should be revised thoroughly by a special board appointed for that purpose. Secretary of the Navy William Henry Moody, however, recommended that Wortman face a full court-martial, although he was ultimately acquitted. The following April, another accident involving a dual turret occurred aboard the pre-dreadnought USS Iowa, when the Boston Globe reported, while at target practice at 12:30 p.m., when on her 3rd shot from the port-forward 12-inch guns, the muzzle blew off and pieces of it penetrated the 3 decks underneath, killing 3 men and wounding 4 others. The following year, in February of 1904, the muzzles exploded on a pair of 8-inch guns aboard the Iowa, although this time without causing any casualties. Both accidents may have been attributed to, a Navy board determined, the irregular and powerful effect of smokeless powder on the guns which had been built for black powder. The board recommended the smokeless powder grain now used be reduced in size. It is expected that will eliminate the irregular pressure. The same day that Wortman was acquitted, April 13, 1904, an explosion occurred in the breach of the 12-inch battery of the main-class battleship USS Missouri. When the Lancaster, Pennsylvania Daily Intelligencer reports, the left gun was being loaded and one section, or 200 pounds of powder, had been rammed home, and the second section of 200 pounds had cleared the hoisting car, when gases from the previous shot ignited the powder. This charge exploded, and a portion of it dropped into the preparing room below, where 4 charges were ready to be hoisted. These exploded and caused the worst of the catastrophe. All men but 5 who operated the turret were killed. A total of 36 men killed as they tried to escape the turret after the initial explosion. When the Intelligencer writes, the second and more terrible explosion directly beneath sent the flames up to the exit through which they were endeavoring to pass. The cause of the accident was, the Intelligencer explains, the wind. The officers described the cause of the explosions as blowback, which means that the wind from offshore blew a portion of the flame from the muzzle back into the breach, where the charge was being rammed home. As with the Massachusetts explosion, quick action from the crew prevented further explosions that could have threatened the ship. 3 crew members, Chief Gunner's Mates Robert Edward Cox and Mons Monson, and Gunner's Mate First Class Charles Stephen Shepke, were awarded Medals of Honor for their efforts in fighting the fire before it could cause further explosions. This raft of accidents over 1903 and 1904 was telling about risks. Iowa and Massachusetts had fought during the Spanish-American War and sustained no damage or casualties, only to be damaged during gunnering practice later. While Missouri had been commissioned too late to participate in the war, its damage also came during gunnery practice. Clearly, there are plenty of risks for sailors, quite apart from combat. On June 12, 1924, the New Mexico-class battleship USS Mississippi suffered a catastrophic turret explosion in a 14-inch gun of its No. 2 turret. The cause of the explosion, the U.S. Naval History and Heritage Command explains, was hot gas that had not been properly ejected in a gun that had just fired, igniting powder that caused a flash fire in the turret. The Madera, California Tribune reported, yesterday 80 men were happily laboring within the turret, 50 loading guns. The breeches of 2 guns had been closed ready to fire. That of another stood open for the sacks of powder that lay on the floor. Someone gave a premature order to fire. Kyle Mizokami wrote in a 2020 edition of The National Interest, although each barrel was blasted between firings with pressurized air to evacuate debris, the middle barrel of each turret received a lower pressure burst than the left and right barrels. This could have led to dangerous debris remaining in the breech when the gun crew assumed it was safe to load. The explosion and fire was so hot that, the Tribune wrote, it melted the 2 doors. An entrance to rescue the men was impossible. 44 men inside the turret were killed, burned to death, or asphyxiated. The Tribune reported that an acetylene torch was used to cut a hole in the turret to access the bodies of the men, which were found twisted, mangled, and blackened. Again, there was significant risk of additional explosions, but the Naval History and Heritage Command explains, Lieutenant Junior Grade Thomas E. Zellers, the turret commander, had managed to pull the flood control lever, flooding the magazine and preventing further potentially catastrophic explosions. Zellers' body was found with his hand still on the lever. A destroyer was later named in his honor. But the accident didn't end there. The Mississippi returned to San Pedro, and as a response team entered the turret, one of the dead men's bodies shifted, causing one of the other 14-inch guns to fire. The resulting blowback, the Naval History and Heritage Command writes, killed 4 members of the response team and injured several others. The shell nearly missed the passenger ship Yale, and the Tribune writes, had the turret, which was revolving at the time of the explosion, remained in the position in which it was at the time of the explosion, the hang fire from the left gun would have gone into the center of the city of San Pedro. The same year, on October 20th, 1924, another turret explosion occurred aboard the light cruiser USS Trenton, just 6 months old at the time. While doing gunnery practice off of Norfolk, Virginia, bags of powder in the forward 6-inch gun turret of the vessel exploded. While the initial cause was thought to be flare-back, it was later determined that the guns had not yet been fired, and the cause of the explosion has never been determined. The explosion killed 6 and wounded 18 crew. Mark Evans of the Naval History and Heritage Command writes that every member of the gun crew was killed or injured. In addition, he writes, the explosion erupted with such force that it thrust open the rear steel door and blew 5 men overboard, one of whom, sailor William A. Walker, drowned. Again, there was heroism in the aftermath. The explosion started a fire during which, Evans explains, ensigns Henry C. Drexler and boatswain's mate First Class George R. Chollister attempted to dump powder charges into the immersion tank before they detonated. But the charges burst, killing Drexler, and fire and fumes overcame Chollister before he could reach his objective, and he died the following day. Both men received the Medal of Honor posthumously. The ship's engineering officer, Commander Paul Foster, with total disregard for his own safety, entered the turret from the upper handling rooms, took the fire hose, which was passed to him from without, and extinguished the fire in the turret and in the clothing of the members of the crew. His action, Evan writes, saved a number of men. Foster, a previous recipient of the Medal of Honor, was awarded the Navy Cross. Another sailor, Seaman Second Class Thomas Bailey, helped to fight the fire despite significant injuries and received a letter of commendation. These two eerily similar accidents, occurring within a few months of each other and during peacetime, shocked the nation. And that was not the only accident aboard the USS Mississippi to occur in the No. 2 turret. 19 years later, on November 20th, 1943, the battleship was providing gunfire support in the Pacific when a nearly identical flareback occurred, killing 42 sailors and wounding 16. The Naval History and Heritage Command writes that Mississippi had won the Gunnery Battery E numerous times and had a reputation as the fastest-firing battleship in the fleet. That striving for excellence may have contributed to the explosion. Here the imperatives of battle ruled. Mississippi's other 3 turrets continued to fire until the mission was complete, and the ship was repaired and back in action within 2 months. And accidents would continue as the combination of explosive powder and the enclosed space of a turret continued to offer danger. In 1951, the heavy cruiser USS St. Paul was engaging in shore bombardment during the Korean War when, the Shreveport, Louisiana Times writes, a violent explosion flashed through the forward turret. Trapped in the turret, 30 sailors asphyxiated from the fumes of burning powder. The Navy said the St. Paul was rounding out a 24-hour continuous bombardment of the enemy coast when the fumes of burning gunpowder killed most of the men in her forward turret. The Naval History and Heritage Command writes the left gun in the turret was loaded, but the breech was open. It is believed that the gun captain mistakenly thought the gun had been fired and therefore ordered another shell rammed into the breech. This caused the gun to explode, detonating 2 other powder bags in the hoist and killing everyone in the turret. The accident represented the single greatest loss of life by any U.S. ship during the Korean War. 20 years later, on October 1, 1972, the heavy cruiser USS Newport News, described as the biggest ship in the U.S. Navy's gun line in Southeast Asia, was, according to the UPI, supporting Vietnamese Marines in the Quang Tri area when the explosion occurred inside a 500-ton forward turret. Taylor Baldwin Killand wrote in the U.S. Naval Institute Press, Machinist mate Second Class Charles Perkins was sleeping when he was awakened at almost exactly 0100 by one of the 8-inch guns. It just didn't sound right. Then he heard the announcement, fire in turret 2. The entire crew was ordered to general quarters, or to the fantail, whichever was more accessible. Confusion reigned in those first few minutes. The explosion and fire killed 19 and injured 10, some within the turret but others from inhaling toxic smoke. This time the Naval History and Heritage Command notes the cause was a defective auxiliary detonation fuse, which caused the explosive shell to detonate almost immediately upon firing. This, the command writes, blew the gun barrel forward, venting most back into the turret and igniting fires within the turret. These burned more than 700 pounds of powder in all 3 hoists, causing extensive damage to the center gun mount and necessitating the flooding of the forward ammunition magazines. Worse, a Navy investigation found, if flame propagated down the hoist had extended a few feet further into the handling room level below the deck, the extent of possible further damage and casualties might have been catastrophic. The loading scuttles at the bottom of the hoist would have been no protection if the hoists themselves had blown apart, as they did in the levels above. Events could have led to a magazine explosion from which the survival of the ship herself would have been in question. This was not an isolated incident, as the Navy classified report on the accident explained. Since 1965, there have been 23 shipboard inboard projectile explosions, which have cost millions of dollars, degraded combat readiness, and taken 24 lives. The rate per shot fired at which these explosions have occurred since that date have increased by a factor of more than 25 over the rate from the preceding 19 years since the close of World War II. The hardware defects which cause such explosions are documented and widespread. Statistically, the next fleet inboard projectile explosion could occur at any moment. It could cost us a ship. The turret was so damaged that it was not restored, and the remaining 2 guns locked in place. In the incident probably most memorable to this audience, on November 19, 1989, the Naval History and Heritage Command writes, A rapid series of 3 explosions within Turret 2 on board USS Iowa resulted in the instantaneous deaths of 47 American sailors. The ship was participating in fleet maneuvers off of Puerto Rico. The investigation report found that the initial explosion was caused by premature ignition of 5 bags of smokeless powder contained within the center gun, with the breech open. The point of ignition was most probably between the first and second bags. Investigating and ruling out the causes of ignition, the report came to the startling conclusion that the explosion was the result of an intentional act. Suspicion was placed on a specific sailor. A second investigation called that conclusion into question, arguing that the explosion could have been caused by over-ramming. This improper loading, possibly due to a mechanical malfunction of the ramming system or inadequate training, the second report stated, compressed the powder and triggered the explosion. It was also found that the turret was undermanned. The Navy never fully accepted the second report, and the cause of the explosion was officially never determined, although the Chief of Naval Operations did officially apologize to the family of the men that had been accused. This is by no means an exhaustive list of gun accidents in the United States Navy, and of course, accidents like this have occurred in other navies. Some of those have even been other episodes of the History Guy. And these risks are much mitigated today. Navies have largely shifted away from using big guns to using missiles instead, and turrets, so much as they are used today, are still more automated, although those new systems offer their own kinds of risks. And of course, the risk of accidental death in Navy service has not decreased. Every year, some hundreds of U.S. Navy sailors will die in non-combat related accidents. But the explosion in the turret of USS Trenton that occurred 101 years ago today is more than a relic of a forgotten era. These young men might have accepted risks when they took on military service, but they died serving their country, and they deserve to be remembered. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.